This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Scott Belsky, an American entrepreneur, author, early-stage investor, best known for co-creating the online portfolio platform Behance, which he later sold to Adobe. That's always a good thing. A story about an entrepreneur starting from scratch and selling out to Adobe. Damn, love those kinds of stories. Always inspirational. Today, Scott and I discuss his newest work, his newest book, The Messy Middle, finding your way through the hardest and most crucial part of any bold venture. Let me be blunt. Scott has put together a deep dive. This is the detail. This is the nitty-gritty. It's really, ultimately, for me, it's that philosophical foundation. Here's how to think. In a day and age where too many people don't think about anything, or if they do think, for some reason or another, they've got the whole process of thinking wrong. Scott's got a secret decoder ring on that. I think you will really enjoy his newest book. Without further delay, let me jump right into my conversation with Scott Belsky. So Scott, I want to jump in with something hopefully a little interesting, and I love this line, and hopefully I'll be the only person that starts an interview with you with this particular line. Scott, keep making a ruckus, Seth. I love that. I love that. I love that. First off, I love the man himself who we're talking about, which is Seth Godin. Let's open this up a little because I know there's some backstory here. I know there's obviously a personal relationship. Why don't you give me a first time meeting Seth Godin?
Well, first time meeting Seth, and who is just an extraordinary man for a number of reasons. One of the first is that he is a very busy man, and yet he still made time when I reached out back in, say, I think it was 2006, 2007, over 10 years ago. I was a new entrepreneur in New York City who wanted to build a conference, not about creativity, but the execution of ideas, almost like the antithesis of creativity or the antithesis of TED. And I invited him to speak. And he kind of came back and said, I don't really do, much speaking. I tend never to do it for free, but I'm interested in what you're doing. And he ended up being a speaker at our first ever conference when we barely knew what we were doing. And really, that, first of all, made a point to me, which is you always have to make time for people, regardless of how busy you are, when there's something that they're doing that is truly at the core of what your interests are. Ever since then, Seth has become a mentor to me. And so once a year, I usually make a pilgrimage out to where he lives to visit him. He was a mentor of mine as I launched my first book back in 2010 and continues to be to this day. And there was this one moment when I was switching from being an entrepreneur into a company that acquired us, Adobe, and I was now taking a new leadership role in that company. And Seth sent me a note that basically just said, Scott, keep making a ruckus, Seth. And actually, since, it meant a lot of things to me. I didn't know what he meant by it. But since there was an occasion where I was actually interviewing him on stage at another conference more recently, and I asked him a little bit about what that meant to him. He talked a little bit about how that's where the origin of great ideas and the origin of kind of our greatest impact in our lives comes from the things we want to do that may not be understood, may not be popular, may not be mainstream. And the bigger company you find yourself in, the more mainstream or in the spotlight of a role you have, in some cases, the less easy it is to keep making a ruckus. And I think, at least this is my interpretation, that he was giving me a reminder, keep doing what I do.
Let me stick with him for just a little bit longer. I have a sneaky suspicion, this applies to me too. He's a mentor to a ton of people that he never even meets because we all read his blog and just say, how can somebody produce such lucid commentary, insights every day and something interesting? What is it about him in particular What is it about him that is so unique? I have a hard time thinking of Seth number 2.
Well, one of the things that strikes me about Seth compared to anyone else I've ever met is Seth very much knows himself, and he knows what he wants to do and what's important to him. And it sounds kind of trite, but I don't think many of us do. I certainly only aspire to know myself as well. He could have done so many things. He could have been an investor in so many companies. There's a million things he could do. And yet he truly knows what he wants to do in terms of his family and his life and his work and his contributions. And I think that when you have that level of insight as to the way you want to live, that level of honesty in some ways of how you want to be, that translates into great work. And I always like to say that ultimately the notion of creative block or having like writer's block or whatever is when you're not facing a truth. And I've always believed that, like when we try to feign something, as a result, we struggle to be truthful. And the greatest work has a hard time coming to the surface. And so if you subscribe to that theory, then it's clear why, Seth is able to be so prolific and insightful. I think he just truly is in touch with what his values are, how he wants to live, and that permeates through everything he does. That's my interpretation.
And, people are sitting out there, some people, the wise ones are not thinking this, but some people are sitting out there right now and they're already thinking, my gosh, Mike, you're taking Scott down this philosophical path. He's talking about not facing the truth. Can't you just give me numbers 1 through 10 on how I launch my company and do all this? There's so many folks miss the simplicity, not facing the truth. It sounds very simple. So important. The philosophy is so key, isn't it?
I think so. I think that we can all have the endless numbers of business books and insights and best practices and whatever. And here I'm demoting the notion of business books while also on your show talking about my new book. But but the truth is that a lot of the work is personal, right? And I can tell you everything you need to know. That doesn't matter. What ultimately you need to do is kind of come to certain things on your own, and also just have the intellectual honesty and the self-awareness and like the continual kind of drive at optimizing both yourself and your product and, and the way you manage others if you have a team. And that's the stuff that ultimately makes a difference.
Well, I just wanted to kind of get you to open up a little bit before I dove you into the messy middle. I must say, as you mention it, I will throw out 3 names of 3 authors. I've already mentioned one that I really think as I go through your work, I kind of see, okay, you know what? I feel the influence of a Tim Ferriss. I feel the influence of a Seth Godin. I feel the influence, I don't know if this is for sure, but of Jason Fried of Rework and 37 Signals fame. But I kind of feel all those things in your work. And I must say, I think the way I would describe it to the audience that maybe knows those 3 authors and knows their work, I would say you've kind of put this on steroids. It's a fairly thick book, but it's an easy read. It's not you're not bogged down. It kind of it goes to all those kinds of aha moments that we all need every day.
That's the idea, is to give people the prompts at the right time for the right situations. And that's why you probably noticed in the beginning, I have a 6 or 7 page table of contents where the publisher was like, what? I really wanted to outline like each sentence that leads each insight throughout the entire book and organize them into a very kind of practical manual. So in some ways it serves a little bit more as a buffet than a 3-course meal, if you will. The other part is that if you're leading a bold venture, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an artist, you know where you are. You're either leading through that anguish and the unknown. You're trying to brace for the long game. You know that you have years ahead and you're trying to find tricks and ways of keeping yourself in it long enough to figure it out. When you're building a team, you're dealing with, oh my goodness, how do I fire somebody? Or how do I make sure I hire the right PR person? Or, how do I kind of structure the communication across my team? When you have these like roadblocks, you're clearing paths to solutions. And it's like, I just need some prompts. I need to have a great advisor right now sitting next to me, prompting me with some questions or insights. And by the way, that's not always me. That's oftentimes the people that I interviewed for the book. And then we have a big part of the book about product. How do you make your product better, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a book, whether it's a digital product, a lot of insights around that. Some stuff about yourself, how to become a better decision maker, crafting your business instincts in your gut. And then one of my favorite parts that hopefully some people get to, because, people don't sometimes finish books, but is what I call the final mile. It's a section at the end where I just focus on all the weird stuff that starts to happen as you approach the finish line, as you're passing the baton to the next leader. And there's a lot of weird self-sabotage and questioning your identity as opposed to the work you're doing, and are they coupled or not coupled, that I get into towards the end.
I think what you're also outlining quite clearly is that potential interview that you might have in the months to come where someone asks you the opening question about, tell me the one secret. Again, getting back to these lists, give me the one thing. The world doesn't work like that. There's more depth to how this all takes place, and to try and reduce, a venture that one starts from nothing, as you map out going through that messy middle and coming out on the end. There's not one little secret decoder ring insight that you can give that will win people over. But a lot of people want that, though, don't they?
Yeah, they do. It's funny, though, at least personally, what I get the most out of is when I have to mine the contradictions. When you look at two opposing insights, maybe two people tell you two different pieces of advice, because that's where you develop your own intuition and you start to understand why two people would approach a problem in two different ways. Like, why does context matter? Why are those details, the nuances, the things that make all the difference? I mean, that's really where intuition comes from. And I try to do that in some respects in the book. If there are two insights that are somewhat contradictory, I actually try to put them right next to each other so that people can kind of wrestle with it. I'll give you a good example. Something about resources, for example, versus resourcefulness. We know we actually need to fuel our team with the resources they need to succeed. And you cannot strangle the team's resources. You always have to be willing to invest, and knowing where to invest and investing ahead of the needs to some extent. And yet I also talk about how resourcefulness is more important than resources, and how actually the greatest insights come out of constraints. And I talk about entire industries that have been revolutionized by a few people together, working under a very resource constrained situation that fueled their innovation and ability to build a sustainable business. So there's lots of things like that, and that's where I would say, that's the reader's work, right? Is to figure out how things relate to one another and make their decision.
Well, of course, and so much of this you have to live too, because then you live it and then you read it and you go, aha. Let's jump into the big out of the gate one, which is what you call the myth. And I think this myth of the world is kind of linear and success is linear and it's a straight line from the bottom to the top. People think this applies to whether it's starting a company, investing in the markets, heck, going on a trip. We've got this psychological hang up where we know the data shows the messy middle. We know the data shows volatility, but we still want to reach for this kind of happy meal of straight line linear, don't we?
Yes. I mean, everyone knows that things are always fun in the beginning, at the moment of conception of an idea. Everyone knows it gets really hard. And then everyone kind of knows that you work towards a finish line that hopefully is a positive place. What I think goes unsaid is just how volatile the journey is in between. And really how much of that boils down to enduring the lows, figuring out a way to keep yourself and your team engaged and together through that endless ambiguity, uncertainty, working in anonymity. No one even knows or cares what you're doing, and fear, right? And self-doubt and all this stuff that you have to endure. There are tactics for that. And a big part of the journey is knowing how to survive and learn from those trenches. And then, of course, there's the high end of the volatility, the peaks. And the peaks are anything that happens to be working, sometimes by accident. And the question teams have to ask themselves, or individuals have to ask themselves, is how do I learn from what just worked and do more of it? How do I optimize the heck out of everything that's working? And that ultimately, through enduring the lows, optimizing the highs, you achieve what I like to call the positive slope of a journey, which is that the lows are a little less low and the highs are incrementally higher as you go on. And that's actually the best case scenario, right? Is that you're always going to have that volatility. In fact, you want it. Positive slope is the best you can do. And that's what it's really all about. It's the insights at the bottom and the insights at the top.
For those people that are not familiar with your career so far, let's go ahead and paint a picture of, your kind of, I don't want to say big break, but you're kind of your start and your first big, your company Behance. I'd love for you to kind of lay that out, because my understanding is this was something that you, small team, no funding, this was bootstrapped. Talk about that early process, because so many young people today, they say, I can't get off the ground unless some rich guy gives me a bunch of money. That's not exactly how you started, is it?
I think that that's the easy sort of way to say, hey, I'm not ready yet, or I can't do this. Blame it on the fact that you need money in order to do it. I think that a lot of great businesses start from the germ of an idea and a very small team that does something, as you called it, bootstrapped. That's what we did. So we started, the three of us, Matthias, myself, and our first engineer, Dave, we actually started selling paper products. So we made notepads. We made small runs of 100, and we would sell them at, 1.5 what they cost. And we would just pocket the margin and, make more. And we bootstrapped our business initially on these paper products to help organize creative people, which then we used some of those profits to invest in just building our team by one or two more people, and started to build a blog that chronicled insights of the most productive creative people.
But let me stop you for a sec. That doesn't sound sexy at all.
Yeah, no, it's not. At the time, though, I have to say, our mission was to organize the creative world. We knew we wanted to do it through a massive online network that someday would have millions and millions of people. However, we also wanted to do it in how people would meet and work together, and building our own product, and then a blog, and then a conference. All these things we did in the early days that in some ways helped bootstrap our company were also helping us build our brand and helping us define what it is we wanted to do in the world.
It was also giving you control too, wasn't it?
It was. When you're not beholden to these third-party investors who have a seat on your board and are angling for an exit, you're able to build your company on your own terms, on your own pace, and also really, focus on things like brand that some investors wouldn't care for.
Let me let you go down the path a little bit more, though, of the bootstrap aspect. You talked about selling the paper products. Was that, you guys got it to the point of profitability all internally before you accepted money from outside investors?
Yeah. So when we raised money, this was 5 years after we started the company, though, we were break even. However, keep in mind that break even is not so hard to achieve if you are not hiring to fund your growth. That was always the situation I found myself struggling in at the time we ended up raising money. I found myself always optimizing towards being a break-even business when my team was saying, Scott, people want to sign up for our site. People want to use our product. We just don't have the resources to build it to be sustainable, to scale with the demand. Why don't we, if we spent a few years investing in the team, we would build a platform that maybe millions of people could use someday. And that's when it became obviously pretty clear to me that we had to get some funding to accelerate our development. But until that point, yes, we were bootstrapped. We had very many months where we were always a month or two away from not making payroll if we didn't do something clever. And when my book came out in 2010, Making Ideas Happen, the first book, which is all about productivity and creative teams, I would go and do conferences and speak and whatever, and all of those checks would go to the company to help pay our bills. We were always trying to find ways to make it work.
Now, were you thinking along that 5 years of internally financing yourself, your profits, were you thinking all along at some stage, I will need outside help, or that just wasn't near the end, it must have been?
Yeah, I think ironically, when our business became simpler. So in the early days, we were trying to do 4 or 5 different things. We didn't know what would stick. And I actually liked the autonomy of being able to test things and, again, build a company in a non-scalable fashion so that we could really learn and understand our market. I really feel like the science of business is scaling. That's what we always talk about. And most podcasts in the technology world and whatever are always talking about scaling, scaling, scaling. But the art of business is the things that don't scale. I wanted to master the art, which was, to me, things like our paper products, things like a conference that was an experience that helped people understand our brand, the ways that we were working as a team. To me, I was super intellectually interested in that stuff. So we didn't think about raising money in the first few years. And then it became clear to me that we might have to. And I would say in the last year or two before we did, that was something I was actively thinking about.
I'm looking right now at your book, and I'm looking at, I guess this is page 5. You got the relative joy of creating. It's kind of this messy middle volatile chart on an upward slope, feeling it at the high point, ouch, the low point, yay, shit, the low point, nice one, rough, champagne, what the fuck happened? Yes, dollars, question marks, aha. I mean, now what? I just love that. It's great. Someone sent me a video the other day, Jeff Bezos, 1997, and he was outlining why he chose books. Right? And so this person that sent me the video was kind of like implying, oh my gosh, look how brilliant Jeff is. He made this one decision in 1997. And I'm thinking, hold on, is it the brilliance of Jeff Bezos and Amazon, not the one decision he made, but the Bayesian mindset of all the decisions that he made that built off the priors and adjusted along the way?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think one thing, first of all, Jeff has certainly navigated every opportunity, or most opportunities extraordinarily well. I don't think even he could have foretold what Amazon would become or what the businesses are that they would be in. However, one also has to acknowledge the fact that Jeff's original shareholder and the things he stated around how they would be allocating capital and how they would operate as a company and the investments and willingness to fail that they would have along the way, those values have been consistent 100% as far as we can tell since the very beginning of the company. And that is admirable. That's not something that he course corrected along the way. I feel like those were some values he set in stone that just stuck and are partly why Amazon's been so successful.
It really is amazing that he could put that particular aspect of it, the values in place. I mean, there's a lot of people in 1997 that were looking at the internet and saying, let's get rich. But he really stuck with what he believed in from the get-go. It's quite an amazing achievement. Let's dive into uncertainty, because then this gets right to your world. It gets to Jeff Bezos' world. It gets to the human condition. Uncertainty is such a tough one for people. It gets back to the whole linear thinking. When you hear the word uncertainty, think about volatility. What does it mean to you? I mean, you don't, obviously at this stage of your career, you're not running from it. You're probably embracing it. What does it mean to you, uncertainty?
Uncertainty is a burden that must be continually processed in the back of your mind in order to define kind of what the dark room around you looks like in your venture. So that's the thing. I mean, if we have 9-to-5 jobs or are told what to do and we get a clock in and clock out, there isn't much uncertainty in that line of work. However, the more you approach the edge of building something new or doing something on your own, the more and more uncertainty you'll have to manage. It can subsume you because it's not necessarily the known unknowns, it's the unknown unknowns, right? And you just don't know how an industry is going to shake up. Are you ever going to find and hire those people that you need? Are those customers ever going to understand what you're doing, and what are they going to be willing to pay you? You just don't know any of these things, and I think that one of the struggles that I've had throughout my journey is how to actually accept the burden of processing that uncertainty, rather than say, oh, I have to be present right now and forget everything. I just actually feel as an entrepreneur, you can't really do that, because you have to allocate like a 20% of your brain to kind of crunching through some of this stuff. It's almost like you need the deep algorithms to crunch a ton of math, and there's just no way of turning the computer off constantly and actually getting that equation completed. What I think you need to do is become better at that art of parallel processing. When you can focus on a specific problem while also churning through the omnipresent anxiety we live with. And I think part of that is actually allowing yourself to just sort of admitting to yourself that this is a fascination of yours. This is like a constant piece of work you're going to be churning. And it's a cost of doing business at the bleeding edge of innovation. I really do believe that. I think that there's also some discipline involved. I mean, when I found myself, for me, it was like on my honeymoon, right? I was even in the midst of my startup still. I was still a few months from running out of runway, capital wise, but I also got married. It was like, I have to, this is where I have to kind of find a way to both be an entrepreneur at this crazy phase of my career, as well as go on a honeymoon where you kind of only do that hopefully once in your life and you want to be present for it. So what's the realistic scenario? Is it realistic for me to just unplug completely for 2 weeks? Most would say you have to do that. As an entrepreneur, I just couldn't. But how did I kind of even structure my day and make sure that I was still present, but also still crunching to some degree, whether I like to admit it or not?
You talk about it in the messy middle, which is self-awareness. And I think anyone that's listening right now, kind of like getting inside Scott's mind and watching Scott have the conversation with himself.
I mean, I think that self-awareness is the competitive advantage in business for a number of reasons, right? I mean, obviously, every time a company is doing well, the only change of fate that can happen is when you start to believe that you figured it all out and you stop paying attention to what's happening around you and you stop criticizing the things you're doing that actually may have worked before but won't work in the future. That's when you either notice or don't notice the things you have to change. And I think individually, I mean, the fascinating thing about businesses, new ventures, and people is that the playbook that works for you at a certain time in your either project or your career could be the absolute wrong playbook for a later stage of your venture, project, or career. And knowing when the playbook needs to be thrown out is the difference between having self-awareness and not. There are many entrepreneurs who have a great idea and who start something out in the first few years are the right founder or leader for what they're doing. But very few are able to make the transition, either changing themselves or taking a different role and hiring somebody to play the role that needs to be played in the future. And that's all self-awareness. And it's much easier said than done.
Fragile ego won't work here for what you're talking about. I mean, you got to be so self-aware that you could just say, you know what, I will literally blow myself up if I have to adjust. Meaning, if the new opportunity is here, the new way I have to look at the world is here, and I can't adjust, I'm a dinosaur, I'm dead.
Yeah, and I think it's a big part of that is doing the postmortems after everything and asking yourself what went wrong, what could we have done better, rather than finding excuses for why things don't work, why a product didn't work. The timing was wrong, the market wasn't ready, our marketing was off. Making sure you also ask the question, like, what are we missing? And scrutinizing that. I think having a very healthy sense of paranoia is absolutely crucial, to any leadership role, but also just in the world of innovation. You always have to be asking yourself, who else is going to disintermediate what we're doing? What are the things that we're doing that aren't necessarily sustainable?
I want to take it to another one of your mentors, close associate now, Bill Gurley. I love the line. I know the name going back many, decades, but digging to learn. I love that. Why don't you describe his process? That's one of those little, just kind of quick ahas for me. Just not necessarily an aha, but a reminder of the proper way to go about absorbing new information and taking a chance to absorb it.
Well, one of the things I've always admired about Bill is he's an extremely successful investor. Obviously, he could, retire at any moment if he wanted to, but he has an insatiable curiosity in a set of interests that he has, and that's what fuels him. And I also, juxtaposing Bill to other investors that I know who are oftentimes eager to find the deal, to make sure that they're doing something in a particular space that's hot, that everyone's talking about or whatever else. Bill's not like that. Bill is very much, from my experience, he'll just have something that he wants to understand, whether it's something like, right now it's at healthcare, and in the past in things like oncology or whatever the topic is that for whatever reason he wants to deeply understand. And he will just, as I said, keep digging and keep trying to understand and scrape away at the kind of the crevices of the opportunity and what might be missing, in that world.
Just pure curiosity?
Yeah, it's because, it's certainly not a time bomb type of, I need to find something and make an investment approach, because in some of these interests, it'll take years to keep asking questions and probing and taking meetings. And I think that that's one of the great traits of a legendary investor who does not feel time bound by what they need to act upon, very, very candidly and earnestly pursues their interests until something is clearly an opportunity for them and they jump on it. But there's, in order to do that, again, easy to say, hard to do. You have to not live in the world of FOMO, fear of missing out that most of Silicon Valley lives in. Whenever they see one of their peers make a deal, it's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do in that space? And if you keep digging and you don't find anything investable, that doesn't mean, if you're still interested, you just keep going. And you don't just stop so quickly. And I think that Bill's an example of many people where you think that the notion of a genuine interest in something, combined with this labor of love, something you love doing, always pays off, just not how you'd expect. If you keep with it, if you keep pursuing something that you absolutely love doing, and it's in your area of genuine interest, right, and skills that you could have or easily possess, you'll end up stumbling across an opportunity at some point. And when you do, you'll be the right person to take it.
It's so true how you phrase it. I think sometimes people get hung up is they put the monetary goal in mind, and that kind of messes them up because they start thinking, maybe a young person, whatnot. And you know what? Look, sometimes the difference between a few million and a billion, there's sometimes some luck there. You can't control everything, but if you have a good process, from the get-go, I mean, you're much better off. Again, that's easier said than done to have that particular perspective. And we've kind of already touched on this, but I love the way you phrase it. Again, this is one of those things for, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs, people that are starting out, they might not want to start with this particular sentence, but I love it. Build your narrative before you build your product. That can be tough for people.
A lot of the things that teams do last in their process are the first things the customers experience in their process. And so, why are we as teams or leaders doing things last that in some cases are the most important things, at least at the top of the funnel, so to speak, of the customer, all the customers we could potentially ever reach and have and engage. This one is really, this insight is really around the importance of not only brand, but also what is the experience you're trying to build as opposed to just jumping in and crafting a product. I talk about Garrett Camp as an example of someone, he was the co-founder and CEO of StumbleUpon, and he also was the co-founder of Uber, and he's the founder of Expa, which is almost like a startup studio. And for all of these ventures, he always was thinking about the brand and the narrative around it. Almost imagine the splash page for the product or service that customers would see before you even start building the product, and sometimes even before you start building a team. And I remember in the early days of Uber, before it was even a company, before he had even recruited anyone to start developing the idea, he was playing with the icon, the logo, and imagining what it would say, what it would mean. I mean, one of the big early questions was, is this a brand that people aspire for, like everyone's private driver? Or is it a brand that is accessible to everyone, like taxis on demand? Making the determination of, well, if we want everyone to use it, you'd think the taxis on demand is the right narrative around it. But in fact, everyone's private driver gives people almost like this feeling of having a superpower in the palm of their hand. That's an example of where the narrative that you develop early on dictates a lot of decisions you make for the product and how it should run, who you should recruit, the stories you tell investors. All of those things, in my mind, come out of that.
It's an interesting example, the way you describe it. I feel like somebody that did not have the secret decoder ring for Uber, in the sense that I've just always kind of looked at it as transportation and a taxi. But if I observe friends and associates, they absolutely look at it as the private driver.
What you just said also underscores like one of the previous points I made about the playbook in the beginning of a business sometimes being different than the playbook later on. When you look at a product like Uber, for example, the first adopters, like the very, very early users of it, they help set off the brand and product in the right direction. And so you could argue that everyone's private driver was the best way to get this adopted by the right people in the first phase of the company. But then as it became more of a popularized notion and needed to engage the pragmatists, or anyone else in society that wasn't necessarily in that first early adopter group, you could argue that they needed to evolve the narrative to engage later cohorts of new users. And that's one of those things that I find a lot of entrepreneurs and product builders and anyone with a service oftentimes overlooks the fact that the first customers you engage, the first people that use your service or whatever, the needs and the tolerances of that cohort of new people are different than the new people that will use your product years from now. And so just because you nailed it for that first cohort out of the gate and your product is now working doesn't mean you don't have to revisit and constantly revise that first mile experience, if you will, for the customer.
I want the audience to understand, as I take you on this path through your work, the messy middle, there is some major diversity here. I mean, I'm looking at my notes right here, and I have one big note that's circled, firing people. So yes, if you're digging through Scott's work, you're going to get his insights on firing people. And that can be really, really tough, especially with people that might start off as a small team together and maybe some success starts to happen. And some of the early people in the team can't continue for an assortment of reasons. Listen,
it's hard to make difficult decisions in a business and in a project, and especially when it comes down to people. Unless you're a masochistic individual, nobody likes letting people go. Nobody likes delivering the bad news, and nobody likes making very difficult decisions. That it's your job to make sure that the best performers in your team have the greatest experience and do the greatest work of their lives. And when those people are working with people that they don't respect as much, their performance and motivation goes down. So you need to, in some ways, cleanse your team of the people that aren't working well or that aren't successful, that aren't performing at the top level, in order to keep the people that are. And so I talk a little bit about what that actually means, practically speaking, and how to do it, and when to develop somebody's performance versus tell them that it's not working. The other thing I talk to, though, about myself is, in my own experience, is something I would do when I was about to make those difficult decisions, when I was realizing that this person was just not going to work on our team and the product was suffering and I needed to just let them go or let them know. Or sometimes it was also a tough decision, like killing a product or killing a feature that was going to be tough because the team liked it, but we just had to focus our energy. And so the little thing I would do is I would whisper under my breath to myself, Scott, do your fucking job.
DYFJ.
DYFJ, which is the title of that section, exactly. And you know what? That was something that I've done throughout my career. And it reminds me, it's like, Scott, you could go agonize back and forth. The easiest decisions to make are to not make a decision yet. And we find that as the outlet in so many situations in our lives. It's like, I know I need to do this. I know this will make my life better. I know my team needs this. I will just come back to it. I'm not ready to do it yet. I need more information. I'll wait until the end of the year. I'll wait until this. I'll wait until that. And it's like, no, do your fucking job.
You're reminding me as you say that, your title of fake wins versus hard truths. I mean, so many people are just into whatever potential short-term fake versus, as you just said, the DYFJ, the hard truth.
Yeah, again, back to one of those contradictions that you have to mine in the book. One of them is what you just said. So I talk about how you have to narrate your team through their journey, and you have to find ways to short circuit their reward system and make sure that people stay engaged even when you're not making any progress, by finding celebratory milestones that the team can see as incremental wins. And then I follow that chapter or insight with the exact opposite in some ways, which is don't ever celebrate or get your team excited about fake wins. And what I'm trying to say there is, when teams try to sugarcoat the fact that things aren't going well, then there is first of all, it breeds mistrust through the team, and you're sugarcoating the self-awareness that you need to swallow in order to see what's really going on. When teams, for example, send around an article talking about them that they paid for through a PR company or whatever, and say, hey, look at this great coverage, like things are going really well. If things aren't going really well, that is a fake win, because you just manufactured it, but it actually isn't. It isn't representing behavior that you want the team to continue doing. And that's actually where I delineate the difference between a manufactured win that is good and a fake win that is bad, is whether or not it is incentivizing a certain type of behavior that contributed to it that you want the team to continue doing or not. You don't want the team to continue paying for PR to get fluff pieces. So that's not good. But if the fake win is, or if the manufactured win is like some milestone in analytics, in your Google Analytics console that you've achieved, that may not mean anything for really your business, or it's not really revenue or anything like that, but it's still an incremental win that is based on behavior you want people to continue. That is worth celebrating.
The middle of a venture is like a lengthy road trip with no windows. Everyone can imagine that immediately, even if it's never happened to us. A lengthy road trip with no windows. Oh my gosh, it's claustrophobic.
Claustrophobic, nauseating, and only tolerable if the driver is narrating you in some way through it. Otherwise, no windows for like 6 hours, yet alone 600 hours, you would go stir crazy.
As you think back, all these different experiences you've had, is there anything in particular in terms of mistakes, like one of the biggest mistakes you've made in your journey so far? You obviously, whatever mistake I'm going to ask you about, you caught and you corrected clearly, but is there anything in particular that you muffed up on that didn't kill you?
Well, plenty of mistakes.
The one that you know that you don't really want to talk about, but you know the one I'm talking about.
Oh, goodness. Well, I can give you many mistakes from the entrepreneurial journey. Most of them are related to doing too many things, not killing things fast enough, and then eventually remedying it before it was way too late, but maybe a little too late. And then I also have, career mistakes where I have taken an opportunity that was an amazing one, but I was taking more so because people said, oh my God, you should do this, as opposed to this is what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Well, I like the one about other people telling you to go somewhere and you not really thinking it's necessarily where you wanted to go, but you were influenced by others.
Yeah, I think that it's really all goes back to the fact that I'm a maker. I like to make stuff. I like to make products. I like to build teams that make products. I like to think through product problems. This is what I get most excited about. And that is actually what has enabled me to be successful as an investor. Because when I've worked with early stage teams, whether it be Pinterest or other teams like that, I am there oftentimes in a product and go-to-market capacity. I'm not as a traditional venture capitalist. But when I was done with a decade, basically, from the beginning of Behance through the end of my first 3 years at Adobe, and had the opportunity to take a job in venture capital, and I didn't really think that I wanted to be a traditional venture capitalist, even though because of my experience as an investor and the fact that a lot of these firms were giving me an opportunity to join them as a general partner, everyone I knew was like, oh, you got to do this. This is such a great opportunity. Actually, a few people I know said, come on, really, Scott? And I should have listened to those people more. But the majority of folks, it was one of those things where it's like, the spotlight of seduction, of being able to do something that is extraordinary, yet isn't who you are. And this is sort of relatively recent in my career. So it's at a time where I kind of felt like, hey, I know what it takes to be successful, and I've been a successful investor, and I should just do this. And, and I think that decision was a little reckless because I sort of departed from all of the things that I absolutely loved doing to do what everyone was saying I should be doing. That was a lesson learned.
I've already peppered you a little bit with some of your biggest influences, mentors, Bill Gurley, Seth Godin. Is there another name in particular, someone that I might not be smart enough to ask you about? Another name either close to you or that you've observed from far away that's really had a tremendous influence on you, and perhaps any story or insight you might want to share with the audience?
Oh, there are many that come to mind. I have a good friend who's also a fantastic entrepreneur. Her name is Jen Hyman. She's the CEO of Rent the Runway. She's just a phenomenal marketer and brand steward and leader. I've seen her grow her team to, I think it's over 1,000 people now, and, just doing a remarkable job. And she's always inspired in me, this sense of like brand integrity, because I've been increasingly interested in the direct to consumer space, all these new companies that are emerging that you see on Instagram selling you clothing and accessories and whatever. And wondering like kind of how do these brands survive and become something that means something versus an Instagram experiment, and learning a lot from Jen in that regard. Another mentor that I bring up is a guy named John Maeda, who was president of Rhode Island School of Design. Before that, led the MIT Media Lab, and is now and just like a all around great design thinker and thoughtful leader. And in my life, he's like my personal Yoda. I feel like everything he says to me is in some ways said in code, and I have to let it jumble around in my head till it makes sense to me, and then it ends up sitting and being really profound for me. And it's oftentimes about the work I want to do, the impact I want to make, what I should be also doing in the nonprofit world through my involvements there. And, John is someone I really look up to.
Great stuff. The messy middle, finding your way through the hardest and most crucial part of any bold venture. Scott, there's one thing I love at the very end that I would love for you to kind of elaborate a little bit. I think people will get it instantly. To be done is to die.
What a great way to end. This podcast will self-destruct in 3 minutes. But the point here, though, is that we're never really finished. First of all, you should never be fully satisfied with your product. You should always have a to-do list with more and more on it. It's ironic that we race to get done with stuff in our life, and yet as soon as we're done, you don't feel fully utilized anymore. You suddenly have a little less purpose, and you suddenly are struggling to figure out what to do next. And so it's a reminder that we're not necessarily aiming to be done. Of course, we want momentary finishes along the way. We want to have punctuation points in our life, if you will. But at the end of the day, being unfinished is a steady state.
There's a lot of, and I'm sure you're aware of this as well, but there's a tremendous amount of physical and psychological benefits to staying engaged. Literally just keeping the system going keeps us going. The moment we retire everything, our thinking, our productivity, the body just starts to shut down.
It does. Yeah, there's a lot of science in that. And I do talk a little bit about, the role of dopamine and the role, all the different aspects of psychology that either support or interfere with the finish line of a project. There's a lot there. And again, it kind of blends back to that notion of self-awareness and the importance of investing in it.
Well, the book that I'm holding in my hand, your galley, it's over an inch thick. It's not, I could hit somebody with this and injure them. Again, the messy middle, finding your way through the hardest and most crucial part of any bold venture. Scott, where can we send people? Where's the best website? They're going to be able to find the book on Amazon, but where's the best website we can send them to?
Well, listen, themessymiddle.com has a list of all the places that I'm aware of that are selling the book, of course, as well as your local bookstore. We want to always support them as well. This has been a 5 to 7 year project of little notations written in board meetings, in late night calls with entrepreneurs, and in my own seams of my own struggles. This is a body of work I'm super excited to share with the world. I've only shared it with a few people, and then I sent galleys to a few folks like you. So I'm glad some early responses are coming in. I know another entrepreneur I saw actually last night told me that who I gave an early galley to. He said, I just ordered 150 for my team. Everyone has to read this. And that made me feel like, okay, I must have gotten something right here. This is intended to just be a guidebook for that very messy middle that no one should go alone. And rather, I hope your listeners enjoy reading it.
Well, I can't say, look, I've done some books myself. It's one of those titles that you realize the author, as you say, it's been a lot of little notes over a long period of time. This isn't the type of book that one just sits down and cranks out in a couple months. It's just not that type of book.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Scott, I thank you for taking some time today.
Thanks again.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.